Well, Ryan Zinke, born in Bozeman, been in Montana all my life. Background, I graduated from Whitefish High School, Bulldogs. I played at Oregon, football scholarship. I joined the SEALs, was 23 years, commander at SEAL Team 6. And I was a state senator and then congressman at large a couple terms, became the Secretary of Interior under Donald J. Trump. And then decided to go back to the front lines in the House of Representatives in the current position of serving in Montana District 1 as your congressman.
Perfect. And then why did you choose to run again, and knowing that you're facing two opponents that you've faced in the past? So walk me through a little bit of that decision to run again for this Congress seat.
Well, clearly our country's in trouble. And I think the Biden administration is going in the wrong direction. And this is what happens when we don't pay attention to the country and the state. And I think everyone to their duty station. And my duty, as I see it, is I sit on appropriations, I sit in the House of Representatives. I'm a former secretary, the only serving former secretary. And making sure that Montana has a voice. A lot of what we see is regulations coming from particularly the Biden administration, whether it's the lack of border or coal strip or managing our forest, mismanaging our resources. A lot of them come from D.C., from people that have never been to Montana. So I think it's important that Montana has a voice in our natural resources and has a voice to make sure that our traditions, are valued as some traditions from New York.
For sure. And what's different about running this time, and what are you hearing from constituents on the campaign trail as their number one issue for this campaign?
Well, certainly the border is an issue, and overseas, the idea that we're going to spend billions of dollars funding Hamas, or affordable housing in Kiev and Ukraine, when things are pretty tough in Montana. The economy is tough, inflation is tough. So I think for Montana, we need to focus on curbing the spending and stopping the attack on American energy. By the way, it's the cleanest. We lowered emissions when I was secretary. And then look at the driving costs of affordable housing. Because I'm a big believer in the American dream should be a house. And when all of a sudden you're destined to be a renter for your life, that's a big section of Montana and the American dream that is not accessible. So you look at the cost of affordable housing, certainly inflation. Let's get inflation down. Let's get interest rates down. Let's look at making sure that we open up, title for home ownership and bring the burdensome regulation costs down. And then maybe look at being innovative and maybe a 50-year government-backed mortgage, because it's really about, cost and payment per month. So if you can lower that payment down by lowering the permit costs, getting the material costs back in line, lowering the interest rates, looking at advancing title, you can bring affordable costs and affordable housing, back in line where a Montana family, doesn't get locked out for life from owning a home in the big sky.
For sure. Well, since you kind of hit on it, we can just go dive into housing a little bit more. So as you mentioned, housing is a really big struggle for people in Montana, and the lack of affordable housing is clear, as well as many across the country are taking on second jobs to make ends meet. What would you do federally? I know it's not necessarily something that you can do at the federal level, but what would you do to help get those housing resources into Missoula, Bozeman, Big Sky communities that are really seeing struggles?
Yeah, well, I think you got to look at the root cause. What's driving the housing costs in Montana? Some is building costs. A lot of it is energy, inflation, and high interest rates. Federally, you want to push down interest rates by stopping the madness in spending in Washington, D.C. It is maddening that we would advance $8.2 million for humanitarian aid into Gaza, which is Hamas, or advance that we're going to have affordable housing, pay for affordable housing in Ukraine, when we have affordable housing problems and issues in Montana, in Missoula. So one is you got to address the root cause. And secondly, you got to look at opportunities of making sure we can have affordable housing, especially entry level. And when they say worker housing, I think we should go back to family housing, because what we really do is we look at opportunity for families emerging, for couples to get together, have a family, and raise a family in Montana. So I think we should go back to focusing on family housing and shoring up, a lot of ways, again, we can address it.
For sure. And what's your economic message to voters? What's your economic message? Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. What is your economic message to voters?
Well, my economic message is America and Montana. America remains, the number one, economic juggernaut. But a lot of the headwinds, unfortunately, are government caused by a DC that's thirsty to manage all aspects of our life or all aspects of a business. So I think the economic message is we need to go look at going back and relieving the burdensome regulation, making sure that our tax code innovates, solutions, equipment purchases, rather than penalizes, technology or R&D. And we want to make sure we get our citizens, Montana citizens in particular, back to work. And work is valued whether you're a dishwasher or a surgeon. But we got to get people back to work and excited about going to work, and making sure that Montana prospers. Not only this generation, but the next generation in the future.
For sure. And since you did touch on taxes, we can transition to that. So taxes have gone up. Property taxes in Montana are significantly increased. Montanans are paying more to the state and federal governments. So what would you do if you were reelected to lower taxes federally and provide tax relief to families that are already struggling to make ends meet without having to write that tax check?
Well, I think the Trump tax plan was spot on. It incentivizes businesses. It brought a lot of overseas businesses home. At the heart of it, you have to make sure energy costs, are low, affordable, and reliable. You look at a lot of problems in Butte, for instance. Some of the businesses are pulling out because you have lack of power certainty. In Montana, look, we have hydro, we have coal strip. And when the federal government targets coal strip without any viable solution, by the way, it affects Montana economy. On the tax side, I think Trump had it right. Is we incentivize businesses, investment, and make sure we bring offshore manufacturing home, principally by lowering energy costs and valuing what Americans and Montanans do best is innovation. And you look at where manufacturing is competitive, and different discussion about supply chain and how critical it is to look at the supply chain. But on the economy side, is we got to make sure that our supply chain is at least under our influence, ourselves, our allies, and that supply chain itself ends in Montana jobs and an economy that can push the next generation forward. It's not easy to live in Montana, by the way.
For sure.
Regardless of what Yellowstone says, great script, great Netflix, but I can tell you, living in Montana is a lot more difficult.
For sure. And so kind of switching gears a little bit to abortion and healthcare. So Roe v. Wade was overturned, and we saw several states move towards some type of abortion ban, and Montana did propose to try to ban or limit abortions. There's even been talk of a ban federally. So what would you do as a representative to the U.S. House when it comes to reproductive rights and abortion for women in Montana and across the country?
Well, I think Roe v. Wade was the right decision as a state. And in Montana, where does Montana state sit as far as what the legislature and the government signed? It's 20 weeks with exception. Europe is 12. I am not an advocate for banning or zero tolerance. No. I am an advocate for what the states have a say. And in this case, Montana has said 20 weeks, which is, I think, fair acceptable. But the other side of the coin is we got to make sure that birth control is widely available. People talk about the abortion, which numbers are down. Every year, down on abortion, which is a good thing. What also I think we need to focus on the front end of it is, we want to make sure that birth control is accessible, that health care for particularly young women is accessible, and questions can be answered, in a pragmatic and truthful way. And then, as Montana pushes to, more adoptions, then look, you got to make it easier for young mothers to have a child. So you can't restrict one side and say, well, we're going to let, a mother who is probably in economic hardships, have the child and be on her own. So, Montana, I think, has, pretty good neighbors. Montana as a whole has certainly, I think, a better, issue, a balance on it than, let's say, DC, California, or one of the other states.
Sure, and then kind of switching gears a little bit to healthcare. The cost of healthcare has increased significantly for many. Healthcare for some Montanans is becoming harder to get as prescription drug prices are increasing and as it's more expensive to get to the doctor even. So how would you help lower prescription drug prices, in healthcare in the U.S. and especially in Montana?
Well, let's be clear. Pharma are not our friends. But I can tell you, to bring a prescription, exciting drug to market is incredibly expensive. The hurdles now are billions of dollars. And what it does do is it knocks out some of the smaller innovative companies that actually has really good ideas. So I think we need to reorganize, how the FDA evaluates, drugs. And perhaps, it's not my area of expertise, but one of the better ideas that I've come across is maybe tiering the drugs, aspirin been used for a long time. That's A. B, there are very few side effects, C, but also litigation should follow that. The more you get in experimental, it's really on your physician, his advice, and the patient, has to have some of that liability. So that's one. And healthcare in Montana is changing. Remote is certainly an exciting advancement, especially for smaller communities. So we want to make sure we have the hardware, the system in place, the lines and the internet, make sure that we can do that. The other thing about Montana, there's been consolidation in the healthcare, industry. But as a whole, since Montana is 1.2, it's a relatively small section of the healthcare. But from my perspective, a big help from the federal side is giving Montana more flexibility. We are not New York City. And how we distribute our medical care and provide access is a lot different than urban America. And the more we can give the physicians flexibility so they don't have to go off an iPad to see what's available on the insurance, and make sure we lower costs by giving more flexibility for the medical professionals, that all care, right? You're in the front line, you care. They should have a little more flexibility and not being driven by policies, that are directed from a DC, bureaucrat.
For sure. And then kind of switching gears a little bit to drugs and crime rates. So fentanyl has had a dramatic increase in Montana and across the country as well. And we're seeing crime rates as well as drug-related deaths go up. What would you do to lower drug-related deaths and drugs coming into the nation and to Montana, as well as reducing crime rates to keep communities safe?
Well, let's go back to the root cause. It's no border. And when I say no border, there's lack of any policing and any securing of our southern border. Our northern border is wide open. We just don't have the numbers coming up our northern border. And along with not having a border comes sex trafficking, child trafficking, drug trafficking, fentanyl. By the way, the number one killer of youth is fentanyl. And we're seeing it across Montana. In Butte, we've had deaths. And overdoses are now commonplace, especially the Indian reservations. So one is you got to secure the southern border, and two, you got a lot of really bad people in here that are part of the Mexican cartel, and you're going to have to go after these people. No sanctuary city, no place safe in the United States. If you're dealing drugs, sex trafficking, let it be known that our law enforcement at the national, federal, local level are going to go after you. Absolutely. So there is a lot of problems across. It's fixable, but you secure the southern border. You got to stop the source, and you got to police and support our men in blue that are out there in the front line.
For sure. And then kind of switching to the Native American reservations that we have in Montana, there are many problems facing them like you were just mentioning. How do you plan to work with these tribes and strengthen relationships when it comes to the tribes to make sure that they're getting the resources that they need and the support to their members?
Well, you know, a lot of it is membership in the House of Representatives. We have Representative Tom Cole, who's been a champion for Indian issues as long as he's been in the House, and certainly as a former secretary and having responsibility as, you know, the advocate for all Indian nations. You know, I learned a lot, and you know, it helps being you know, born and raised in Montana and having the Salish Kootenai and the Blackfeet just over the hill. And over time, I've developed a great relationship. I've adopted a Assiniboine. I respect the tribes. A lot of it is respect, and a lot of it is recognizing they are a sovereign nation, and they're on equal footing with the United States government. And I think with respect and they know that, look, you know, I was a Navy SEAL. I came from a warrior culture. Certainly the Plains Indians, you know, are honorable. They come from a warrior culture. Their veterans are revered. But I've always had a good and I would say working relationship with the nations.
Perfect. And then I just have 3 more questions for you. Hopefully we get through them. So let's kind of move on to veterans. So Montana is home to a very large population of veterans. How would you continue to support the veterans at a federal level to ensure that they're getting the benefits that they need and the support and resources that they need across the country and also in Montana?
Well, certainly as a veteran, but also my wife was involved in the VA transition team, and she has a passion for spouses of veterans. So as a veteran, you know, over the course of time, some things have changed. You know, on the VA, you have an older generation, particularly in Vietnam or Korean, that has different needs than our younger generation, although there's some overlap. The younger generation prefers, you know, access and flexibility. The older generation, more brick and mortar. And the VA itself is entirely too bureaucratic. And quite frankly, on the VA, we need to reorganize it at the national level. Example, a new secretary can come in, which I have experience in it. Said, I want to deliver a policy. Well, in order to execute that policy, there's literally 52 different unions you got to negotiate with. There's all sorts of contracts, and it's so difficult on the bureaucracy side, even though you know it's a really easy pitch, easy decision, but a lot of times the bureaucracy and just layers of necessity to reorganize, you know, a lot of it is, let's clean up the system so a secretary can make a decision and deliver access to their veterans.
Perfect. And then moving on to agriculture. So Montana's a big agricultural state. What would you do to support the farmers and those in the agriculture industry in Montana?
Well, on ag, what I'm hearing from, you know, the Farmers Bureau and those that are actually in the front line is, you know, waters of the U.S. is a threat. In Montana, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. But water rights, when all of a sudden the federal government is going to have jurisdiction over your cow pond, that's a problem in Montana. You know, also crop insurance, and make sure that crop insurance, that program is, you know, not only reliable and there, but also offer a little more flexibility. You know, because, you know, as an example on ag, you know, some of the pulse crops could easily be cover crops, but sometimes the crop insurance itself is too narrowly focused and issued, you know, out of a plan that's developed in D.C. You know, the other thing I think a concern is on the tax structure, making sure you can leave your farm inheritance tax to the next generation. There's just no way that a Montana farm or cattle or anything could afford to recapitalize if they don't have some help on inheritance tax. And those taxes are coming up soon. But you know, Montana's a great state on ag. We're number one in pulse crops. Cattle prices are pretty good, and the community I think is pretty healthy overall.
Perfect. Well, those are, I think, all we have time for today. But thank you so much for taking time to sit down with me and answer some questions. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You know, I remain a Reagan optimist. You know, I haven't seen any problem that's not fixable. But look, we're going to have to attend to business and pay attention to what we're doing both nationally and in Montana. But I enjoyed the interview, and God bless.
Thank you. Have a good day.